which board right now. So please do know this is recorded for future training purposes. So now that we've gotten that stuff out of the way, I want to welcome you again to FOIA and Fight Back. This webinar series, again, will focus on Georgia's Open Records Act and how to use public records to support your own advocacy, your organization's advocacy, or other movements of which you're a part or helping to advise. Just we want to start off with giving some overview about Center for Constitutional Rights and what we'll cover here today. As I mentioned, Georgia's this specific series, as well as CCR's Open Records Project, is really focused on training individuals to train others to understand how open records can be a really useful tool for local advocacy as well as national, for media, litigation, and other organizing work and campaigns. So today we'll be sharing some key strategies about what the Georgia Open Records Act is and how to actually put together a request, which we'll do today, doing a little bit of workshopping. So for background in terms of how this whole thing came to be, as Ian mentioned, he leads CCR's Open Records Project. And then I am leading the expansion of our Southern work, our Southern Regional Office. And so this webinar series, as well as another tool we put together called Sweet Tea with Transparency, an open records resource for movements in the South, came to be as a part of this collaboration between the Open Records Project and our Southern office. So a little bit about the Open Records Project. Our Open Records Project utilizes public records requests as important tools at the core of CCR social justice work in support of communities and movement partners. Our unique approach aims to center our allies' vision for accountability and social change in legal and advocacy work. And then our Southern Regional Office partners with Southern grassroots movements, human rights defenders, and community organizations fighting to transform material conditions, to dismantle systems of oppression and advance visions of collective liberation in the South. Can we move to the next slide, please? Thanks so much. Ian, you want to give an overview for today?
Sure. So we are through introductions. We're going to do an overview of the Open Records Act in Georgia and kind of talk about some key parts of how to make a request, as well as kind of advocacy around doing requests. We also have a sample recent open records request that we've done that Emily's going to talk about. And then we're going to kind of draft a couple parts of a new request together. And throughout this all, you can drop any questions you have in the queue using the Q&A function on the Zoom webinar. And I think we will answer them if we can, or if we can't answer them immediately, we will definitely try and answer everyone's questions at the very end. With that, maybe we can, I don't know, Emily, do you have anything else to add, or we can go to the next slide?
Nope.
All right. So I think one thing that makes, I think, the way CCR approaches open records work and Freedom of Information Act work differently than other organizations is that we really see it being a useful movement campaign tool beyond just kind of a way to get records or a way to get transparency. Obviously, that's really important as well. But we try, if it's strategic, and it's not always strategic, but we try to think of ways to use the actual process itself, whether it's state, federal, local, as an advocacy tool. And we've really been taught about these kinds of strategies by our movement partners on the ground. So just a couple things to think about, kind of when you think about open records requests, it might be worth thinking more broadly than just, I want that record, or I want those emails or that data. It's kind of, open records requests can be a public demand on the government. They can be kind of a public call out as well. And so we will often do press releases when we file our open records requests. The press release might talk about things beyond just the records we're asking for. It will talk about quote, people impacted by the policies that we're asking for records about, and could really kind of make the focus and the narrative bigger than just, hey, we're asking for some data or we're asking for some records. So that's kind of one key uh, way we kind of use each step as we move forward in our records request as a potential press advocacy moment, if it's strategic. Sometimes it's not strategic to do so. Connecting with journalists and legislators about your requests is something we try and do a lot as well. Like I said, kind of the media advocacy is always useful, but so can sometimes be legislative advocacy, kind of adding pressure to a government agency to produce documents by kind of reaching out if you have that kind of connection, or calling on them to call on the agency to release important documents or data can be really useful. And then obviously publishing the documents that you get back, publishing key documents. I think sometimes the kind of back and forth can get so involved that we lose track of actually making sure that we're publishing what we get. And so thinking about different kinds of ways to publish what you get. Sometimes it just means posting the document on a website. Other times it might mean doing some data analysis or kind of drawing out certain conclusions and ideas and narratives from the documents. And then using the documents as kind of a step ladder process where you might send a request for one thing, get something back, and then what you get back helps you formulate the next request and the next piece of advocacy. Is a good thing to kind of way to think about requests, especially in Georgia, where the kind of turnaround time is much faster than other states and definitely much faster than the federal government potentially. So, we'll get into kind of the details of that, but those are just kind of some high level ideas. And again, sometimes it's not helpful to do public advocacy with your requests. Sometimes it's important to keep things under the radar, but I think it's worth being creative and thinking about the records request process creatively rather than just as a kind of transparency tool. I don't know, Emily, if you have anything to add to all that.
One additional piece I'll add that we'll talk about a bit more when we get into the Georgia Open Records Act is how open records can also be used. I mean, this is probably very obvious and undergirds all the points Ian already made, but how open records can be used as an investigatory tool to build up other work, including litigation. And we'll talk about an example later on. But for those who are familiar with the litigation process, once a suit is filed, right, you have a period of discovery where either side gets to discover information and documents and, uh, information through deposition testimony from the other side, and right, both sides have to produce that. Well, if you're pre-filing, unless there are some rules for pre-filing discovery or pre-litigation discovery, you won't have discovery. And so open records can be also really, really key to, building up a case that your partners would like you to file, or you have a potential client who's asked for some sort of legal representation in support of their movement work or campaign. And so open records, can be used for that purpose until you get to the litigation stage.
Super important. And so now I think we're gonna go to our next slide and we'll reference the Sweet Tea resource that Emily mentioned earlier, which is our kind of uh, open records resource for a number of southern states. It's available for free. We have not only kind of basic explainers, but sample requests on the FOIA Basics website. And I think just kind of, I imagine a number of the folks on the call might already know some of this, but hopefully we can kind of provide a different perspective. Uh, what is a Georgia Open Records request? What kind of agencies can you send them to? I really think um, when I think of open records requests and I'm just starting to build the request, I want to be really creative. I want to maybe do some digging around. There might be one agency that does have the information, say, uh, a county jail or a police department, but there might be other sub-agencies within that police department, especially if it's a bigger police department, say like the Atlanta Police Department, that we want to make sure are searched, that we want to make sure that our request is directed to. And so in Georgia, you can really send a request to almost any agency. You can't unfortunately send it to the legislature, but there's still ways to get at that. And the one of the kind of really nice things about the Georgia law, and I think this was shown recently in the win from the Atlanta Press Collective, is that you can actually get records from kind of third-party agencies that are doing business or connected to government agencies, which is not something you can do in most states and under the Freedom of Information Act very easily. So I think that really opens the door. That the case I mentioned, if you haven't heard about it, it's about getting files and documents from the Atlanta Police Foundation, which is not necessarily a specific government agency, but I think it does kind of further cement the ability, hopefully, of folks, you all and others, to get documents from anyone who might be necessarily contracting with a county agency, contracting with a city or state agency, or doing other things, especially in 2025, where I feel like so much work that used to be under the kind of responsibility of a government agency is now privatized. So I think that's something unique and worth thinking about when you're crafting your request. What kind of records can you get? All kinds of records. Again, I really urge folks to be creative in thinking through all the different types of records that are out there, the different types of data. Unfortunately, we live in kind of a surveillance state these days with the internet and all kinds of different, computerized things gathering data on us, but that also means that we can request that data, right? So if you're requesting uh, body-worn camera video from, say, a police department, those body-worn cameras also record a lot of other data outside of just the video and the audio. So it's worth saying, I want to make sure I get the geolocation data and maybe uh, any notes or tags that the officers add to those videos once they're recorded. So there's a lot of different ways to think about data, and beyond just emails and policy memos, which are always, can be really important, but it's worth being creative about the different types of records you request, and how they could fit into your advocacy campaign. How do you submit it? Uh, all the agencies are supposed to have in Georgia are supposed to have someone designated as an open records officer. There might be even multiple open records officers. Um, so you want to kind of try and find out who that is. Hopefully it's on the website. We can get into this a little more later, but you might need to call the agency if it's a smaller agency and ask who is responsible for open records, and also whether there's a specific form that they want you to use. And direct your request to that person. If you can't find it for some reason, then I think it's worth if you were to reach out to that agency anyway, making sure it's clear that what you're doing is an open records request and you're directing it to the person responsible for uh, handling those types of requests. Fees. Georgia agencies can charge fees, and I won't get into all the nitty-gritty about how much it might cost. They're supposed to be able to charge so-called reasonable costs for the time spent in producing records to you. They cannot charge for the first 15 minutes of a search, and they can charge up to 10 cents per page for copies of records. They are not supposed to charge more than the hourly salary of the lowest paid full-time employee, who is kind of fulfilling your request. That is not necessarily an easy thing to find out, but can be useful to find out if you get kind of a response back from them saying, oh, we can't produce this to you unless you pay thousands of dollars, right? Likely that they are trying to dissuade you from continuing by kind of coming up with a crazy sum. However, what we do is we will always ask for what's called a fee waiver, basically, or a discount. in the name of kind of doing public interest work, doing nonprofit work. And so I think it's always worth asking and saying, hey, doesn't have to be long, but hey, I work at the Center for Constitutional Rights. We have a long history of doing public interest work. We have no commercial interest in the records that we're going to get. We're not going to use them to sell things. And so we'd really appreciate it if you give us a waiver of all fees or at least a discount on fees. And this does work. It doesn't work every time, but this has definitely worked in different states that I filed requests in where there is no official kind of law saying you can get a fee waiver, but by asking, they have chosen to set aside charging us fees or deeply discount the fees that they do charge. So it's always worth asking. And then one more kind of key question is, what do you do when the agencies kind of delay or don't respond or they send back redacted documents? I mean, there's a couple of different answers that I could give here, and I'll let Emily chime in 1 second. Unfortunately, the Georgia law does not have what's called an administrative appeal process, which is what the federal FOIA law has and some other states have, where there's an actual, you get a denial of your request and you can appeal to kind of a different body to kind of relook at your request and hopefully find some accountability through that mechanism. However, I think, especially when you're dealing with smaller agencies, it's always worth, if you get like a denial or you get questions, or they don't respond immediately when they're supposed to, just following up with them, whether it's by phone, hey, did you get my request? Whether it's by making a written record over email. But it's worth, and if you have to go back and forth with them a little bit, I think it's worth, it can be worth doing that. Sometimes especially in the smaller agencies, there's just not a lot of staff to respond to requests. And so it might be worth talking to someone and kind of finding ways to make it more efficient or easier for them to process and look for the records you're requesting. One thing, though, is that if you do talk to people on the phone, make sure you take notes, detailed notes of when you talk to that person, who you talk to, what kind of, if you made changes to your request, all that's very important. You want to make sure you have a written record of what steps you've taken as your request moves forward, so you can refer back to that if you need to. And before we get into an example, Emily, I don't know if you want to add anything to kind of those basics of Georgia Open Records Act.
One, just that Ian is truly the guru of open records. And knows this stuff like the back of his hand. And so wanted to, we all hear this throughout the training, but offering CCR, not just Ian, right? Of course, pending availability, but even after this training, we're available if you ever have questions about open records requests you're wanting to draft or submit, or you've already submitted it, and you're trying to field, what next step to take and how to resolve it or elevate the request. But I just wanted to, really give Ian his flowers, because as you can see, he's super knowledgeable about this stuff and the strategy in particular. And then two, to highlight, I put in the chat the links to both our FOIA Open Records project and Sweet Tea with Transparency, specifically the Georgia Explainer. And as you'll see in the Georgia Explainer, all of the elements and the factors and considerations that Ian just went through. But in particular, I want to highlight the practice tips that are throughout the explainer, kind of for quick references as you're drafting your requests and coming kind of to the end of your drafting process, using those practice tips as a kind of check mark, if you will, to ensure, for example, that, you've stated the public interest of your request, even though it's not required, but it could be helpful with the fee waiver and also for advocacy purposes and so on and so forth. So that's it.
Great. So I think we're going to just move to the next slide. It's going to be a kind of a recent request that Emily helped put together and filed.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, so I mentioned this a bit earlier, but using open records requests to support, eventual legal advocacy, specifically litigation. And so as we were learning more about the specific bill that was just signed into law by Governor Kemp here in Georgia in May of this year, Senate Bill 185, which bans the state from providing any resources or funding related to care or treatment for gender dysphoria to incarcerated persons here in Georgia. We submitted public records requests to learn about the state's plan to implement the law. And actually, got a lot of helpful information in terms of just learning about what the law, what the plan was for implementing it, even, communications between corrections officials, as well as an external healthcare provider, Centurion, as to the plan to implement the law, reservations even about implementing the law. And so here on the screen, you'll see an open records request that we submitted to the Georgia Department of Corrections relating to SB 185 and any mention of terms related to the law, including gender dysphoria, hormone replacement therapy. You'll see the list here, sex reassignment surgery. And so we wanted to provide a more recent example of how, open records can be used for many different types of advocacy, and this is one of them. And I don't know if we actually if it's on the next slide, I think. In terms of an example of what we got. But as you'll see here from the request, we asked for data, documents, communications related to the law and its implementation. And so one record that we got, again, it's a public record, interestingly, to the point that Ian was raising about private entities being subjected, or if not the private entities themselves, but documents that could be within their custody and control because they're operating on behalf of the state or providing some sort of state function. Those could too be subject to discovery. And so Centurion is the healthcare provider for Georgia Department of Corrections. Centurion is a privately contracted healthcare provider. And so there was a PowerPoint presentation in some of the open records that we received in response to our requests related to the Department of Corrections plan to quote unquote detransition individuals from their hormone replacement therapy and other care that they had been approved for and had been receiving, even pursuant to Georgia Department of Corrections' own policies for the treatment of individuals with gender dysphoria. And so there's a screenshot here that Ian very helpfully put on this slide because I am technologically challenged. And yeah, this is the PowerPoint presentation. And yeah, it goes through, it's actually a very difficult document to read, but goes through the care that the plan care, quote unquote, that the state plans to offer to take people off of their care. So again, just an example of how open records requests can be a useful tool in advocacy because we don't have discovery. So that's it. And again, folks, please feel free to chime in with any questions in the chat or the question and answer feature.
Yeah, please chime in with any questions. I'm gonna I can share my screen in a second and kind of build a request on the fly a little bit using some of the things we've talked about. But again, please chime in with any questions on the Q&A feature. Hold on one second. So I was thinking about different things happening recently in Georgia, and wanted to kind of show a couple different ways you could go about putting together a request, especially even just seeing a news article that impacts whether it's people in your community, people you're working with, partner organizations, etc. And so I'm just going to kind of highlight a couple things and kind of show you some of the basic building blocks of the request. Just a reminder to my co-hosts that I don't know if I can see if there's questions, so please feel free to chime in. I had seen this recent news article on Capitol B in regards to the largest ICE facility planned at Georgia private prison with deadly record. So this was a pretty creepy and upsetting article in regards to the expansion of this facility that maybe some of you are already familiar with, to hold thousands of ICE detainees as part of Trump's ongoing crackdown. And not only that, but I think they talked to an organizer, a local organizer here, in regards to the fact that a lot of the detainees likely will be Black immigrants from Jamaica, Haiti, and Nigeria in the Atlanta area. And so I read through the article and a couple of different ideas popped up for records requests that might be useful if I was, say, doing work on immigration in Georgia, in the Atlanta area, or outside the Atlanta area. And so just kind of scrolling through this, I saw a couple things. I saw obviously that there's kind of this kind of even more racist dimension to the focus of immigration detention in Georgia that might be worth inquiring further and finding some data on. And then I saw this part here in regards to U.S. representative kind of bragging about the new detention facility as a boon for Charlton County's economy, creation of jobs and revenue. And that was kind of something that might be worth poking around into. I saw at the end of the article that the governor signed this bill that reinstates kind of the 287G program, where it kind of deputizes local officers to basically become ICE agents, and how none of the sheriffs in Metro Atlanta's 5 core counties were reportedly signing up to participate. And then this last sentence about the contract for the new facility awaits approval by Department of Government Efficiency. Now, I think we know that that is most commonly referred to as Dodge. That's Elon Musk's new secretive, crazy department. And so that's a number of different kind of avenues to kind of, I think, potentially go down for requests. And so I thought maybe, well, let's check out this claim by Buddy Carter, who I'm not familiar with. I assume maybe Emily and others are. He's heralded this thing, so it links to this kind of statement from his office. So I went and I opened up this statement, and in the statement, he brags about opening this center, but he says, "I'm proud to have worked with Charlton County to get the correctional expansion over the finish line." And then it also says that the city of Folkestone will receive approximately $600,000 a year in water and sewer services. So there's two things here. One is that he's a United States representative, but he is saying here that he's been working with Charlton County. So that makes me assume, okay, well, he's worked with local officials in Charlton County, and those communications, as he was discussing, how to bring in ICE, whatever kind of awful law enforcement things that they were discussing, probably exist somewhere, right? And so it might be worth asking for some of those emails or communications between him and the county by sending a request to the county. So that's one kind of idea I had. And then the other thing here is he's predicting that the city of Folkestone is going to receive $600,000 a year in revenue. How did they come to that number? How do we know that they're going to actually receive $600,000 in revenue, as well as bringing in roughly 400 jobs? I think especially the $6,000 in revenue a year, I wonder, are they just making that up, or were there some kind of good or bad math there to come to that number that put it in a press release? And another thing just to think about is, well, I don't think we can directly FOIA his office, but when you see press releases, when you see quotes in papers, I don't think they quoted anyone here from the government in this article on Capitol B, but whenever you see someone from a government agency quoted in an article, that probably means that there are communications between the journalist and the agency, and there's probably internal communications at the agency where they're talking about how do we respond to this journalist's inquiries. And those communications can sometimes be very interesting and illuminating as far as the attitude of people at the agency or the agency itself, whether they're scrambling to try to cover something up, whether they're trying to scramble to put a spin on something, but that can sometimes be a useful and powerful uh, kind of type of record to get at that I've seen a lot of grassroots groups use to their benefit. So um, what I did is I went, and again, our Sweet Tea resource, I went to the annotated request that we have. This is an old request I did several years ago to the Bureau of Investigation. But a lot of these requests are going to have a lot of similar kind of boilerplate language. And so I highly recommend just kind of reusing if it's good language, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can use kind of some of the basic language and just mold it to what you're asking for and what the topic is and what the advocacy and work that you're doing. So I took some of this language and I put it into a Google Doc for a sample request. And I'm just going to kind of go through parts of this and fill a couple places out where I need to. Again, please stop me with any questions that might pop up. Uh, some things seem very basic, like dating your request, but dating your request is going to be really important because of the law and the turnaround times. So dating any public records request is always important because there's usually some type of deadline that the agencies have to meet. And so you want to make sure that it's very clear when you sent that request and what date you put on it. And then obviously where is it going to? And I'll get into that in 1 second of figuring out that. Public records request, just making it clear, this is a public records request. There's a lot of kind of basic stuff in a records request that I think is worth doing that might seem kind of obvious or maybe even dumb, but my experience is that a lot of government agencies, especially law enforcement agencies, have a tendency to try and find ways to delay or dissuade you from pursuing your records request. And they'll use very basic things like, well, we didn't know it was a public records request, or we didn't, know that you were asking for uh, emails when you said communications. We thought you were just asking for written letters, right? So they'll kind of use these kind of vague bad excuses sometimes to stop you from pursuing your request. So that's why it's good to do things like label your request a public records request. And cite to the law. We're making it under the law itself. This is kind of one of those boilerplate things. Just take it, if you want to take it from our website, totally fine. And then direct this request to, and the XXX here is the place where we're going to be directing the request. So coming back to this press release, since he said he was talking with Charlton County, I was like, well, and then also the city of Folkestone in Charlton County, I thought, well, okay, then let's go figure out how to make requests to Charlton County and to the city of Folkestone leadership. And so I Googled Charlton County, and they have a website. And I do this all the time with a lot of local requests. There'll usually be some type of website, and sometimes there might be a link right on the website that says, how do I file a public records request? But other times they'll kind of hide it because they don't want you making requests. So I kind of lurked around their website and I couldn't find anything that obviously said open records. Here's a request form, so this is good. And I'm going to open that up. Board of Commissioners. Let me make a note about forms in a second. But I couldn't figure out exactly where to send this to. I see that there's Board of Commissioners on here, but that might not necessarily be the place I want to send it to. The Board of Commissioners might be different than the city administrator, right? And it might be worth sending to both. So what I went in here also is I went to I went to contact us. When I clicked on contact us, there's a staff directory, and I saw under county clerk, open records officers. And I clicked on that, and this gave me two people, an address, some phone numbers, and an email address there. And so I think it's probably worth reaching out to both the address on this form, if it's not the same, as well as this person specifically with an email address here. I highly recommend emailing your request rather than making it over the phone. But legally, you can go into someone's office or make it over the phone. You can make public requests in Georgia over the phone. And so I would take something like this, and I would just, if my mouse works, I would just copy and paste it into my address here with the email address. And I'm going to try to speed things along because I know I might be taking a little too much time, but that's basically how I find where to direct it. We have an actual open records officer's name. That's good. You want to be able to direct it to someone specifically. Thing about forms, okay? A lot of agencies are going to have special forms, whether they're on the website or not, to fill out. Don't feel like you have to put your request into that form. I think what it's worth doing is filling out the form to the extent that there's things on here like your name and certain kind of summary information about your request, but then write something on the form that says, see attached request, and then attach however much you have to write out in a request attached to that form. That's always how we do it. Don't feel like you have to get boxed in when a form only gives you a little bit of space to put your request in or anything else. They kind of want to box you in a lot of the time, and that's not, you don't feel like you have to. And then the city of Folkston was also linked off this page, and they have a lot of different contact places here. Maybe administration, city government. If there's no open records officer that I can see here, then the city clerk might be a good place to go. Sometimes like here, they might find a description of what she does. Anyway, directing a thing to the city of Folkston as well. To get back to what we were talking about here in regards to the communications with this legislator, I think what's worth doing is coming back to our request, is so this request is to Charlton County, city of Folkston, sorry if I'm misspelling it, and any applicable components or offices within those agencies. So kind of covering our bases in case there's other things I don't know about or you don't know about that are within there that might have records that we want. And this is just a very brief summary, all records to the planning of the new immigration center in Folkston. It can be worth citing to something to show that yes, there is a planned thing. So I might go to this article I mentioned before, copy the address, and say see this article and provide the link. And then I'm going to get into the specifics of the request itself. And so I might say any communications between Representative Carter and administrators of Charlton County. And then I might regarding the ICE immigration facility. And then I might just say the same thing here, but change Charlton County for city of Folkston. And then the rest of this is pretty straightforward. And again, I copied it from that sample request. and these are kind of important things to include when you make your request. Please justify and label all the exemptions to any records. So this is basically like, if you're going to redact something that you send back to me, make sure it's labeled what reason for exemption is a legal term for like kind of the reason for redacting something. So give me the legal kind of citation to why you redacted it, and don't redact the parts that you shouldn't redact. So don't start redacting entire pages when only parts of those pages are actually legally exempt. And produce all of that to us. And then the fee waiver piece I mentioned before, this is kind of a again, boilerplate description of why we should get a waiver of fees for our request, because we're nonprofit, we're doing this in the public interest, and we have kind of a history of work on these topics. And then we also include this line here, please provide us a notice in regards to fees greater than $25, which is part of the law, and just as kind of a safeguard in case they come back and say, hey, we found all these records and now you have a bill for $500. So it's worth kind of putting something in there in regards to that, and you can always copy from that sample request. We remind them that we should get a response in 3 business days, which is what the timeline is under the law. And then we give a specific place to send records to. You really want to kind of, I would suggest not having multiple people sign off on open records requests. I think it's really important to kind of make sure it's very clear who to direct any responses to so that nothing gets lost if they send it to someone who no longer works at your job or is on vacation or whatever it might be. And I think that's about it. And we send that off and see what we will get in 3 days. And maybe it ends up that we start communicating with that open records administrator and doing some back and forth to clarify parts of the request. But this is basically how we kind of formulate something that if we opened up again this article and a number of questions were raised, this is kind of just one of the different questions that I had when reading this article and I was interested in. I think one other request we could do in regards to that 600,000 is maybe inciting to this press release. We could say any data or financial computations, probably better words here, related to the estimated 600K revenue figure available here. And you could put a link to that press release. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
And there is a question in the chat, Ian. It looks like possibly Folkston is within the boundaries of the Okefenokee. Is that an angle to pursue to see if there's federal level communication, perhaps re-water requirements?
Absolutely. Great question. Yeah, definitely. I think especially again, the beauty of, I do a lot, most of my work is federal FOIA requests, which move very slowly. And so it's kind of, I'm kind of an open records nerd, but it's kind of exciting that in Georgia, there's a 3-day turnaround. That's much faster than what I'm used to. And so I think why not send a request to a different county or other related places to try to cover your bases. And I mean, also that article, you know, I think I talked about how it said the county was waiting on, I think, waiting on Dodge, right? Waiting on a federal agency to approve something. And so anytime, and obviously ICE is also involved here in regards to the immigration detention piece. So I think it's always worth maybe playing state and federal off each other. It's worth, even if it's slower, to send kind of a overlapping request to the feds to see what you get back from them, and sending something to the state, and maybe you get back something from Georgia, from the state or the local request that you can use in your federal request, back and forth. So I think that kind of strategy has been very useful to us over the years in getting records. When one, say ICE says, oh, we can't give you that, but then we get those same records from the local agency. Any other questions? We have a few minutes. We're ahead of time. And we are happy to answer any other questions, but also obviously, like Emily said before, I am always happy to answer any questions after this presentation. You can always get in touch with me. This is what I enjoy doing, is helping out with open records requests.
Yeah, and I'll also add, in addition to kind of in the background advice and counsel on drafting and sending and pushing through the quote unquote system open records requests, we are more than happy to do a more in-depth training even in person. We have folks, well, now we are up to 2 folks here who live and work in Georgia, though we work throughout the Southeast, but I'm more than happy to do, more intimate training with folks in person. And we don't yet have the logistics planned out for this, but there is talk to do what is it, Ian, 202 training. This is now, just a 101 training, very, very basic and obviously pretty short, because we just want to give you a taste of what the possibilities are and share these resources and connect with you all so we can continue to support your work, whether it's through open records work or other sort of tools or resources that we can offer through CCR.
Totally. And I see there's another question in the Q&A. Are there any creative video or audio asset sourcing avenues you would recommend beyond the body camera example from earlier? Great question. I think it's always worth Googling, obviously, like depending on the police department, sometimes they will talk about the different types of kind of surveillance they might be using. But I think there are a lot of surveillance cameras out there. There are a lot of departments that use kind of standing surveillance cameras. There are, what are they called? The cameras that they have inside the car, which are not mobile, but are always on. I forget what those cameras are called off the top of my head. Um, Dashboard cameras. And another thing that we have looked into a little bit in other cities is a program called Shot Spotter. This is supposedly a way for police agencies. It's like an electronic detection system that they set up in so-called high crime neighborhoods where it supposedly can detect the sound of a bullet or a gun being fired. But actually can record all kinds of other things as well. And so there's no video attached to that, but that is an audio, kind of automatic audio technology that a lot of bigger police departments at least have been using. So it's worth looking into that as well. And I'm happy to think through other avenues, but unfortunately there are a lot of different surveillance technologies out there. And uh, and they record lots of other data. For instance, ShotSpotter records the audio, but also records a lot of other kind of date, location, etc. data electronically that we've been able to request in other jurisdictions.
Yeah, and I would add again, if we're not thinking of exact examples right now in the training, if, again, if you all have ideas for open records requests that we can help workshop with you, and once we know, right, what the factual context is and the circumstances, we could, help think through other ideas that could constitute public records that are recordings or other more creative sources of data that you'd be looking for or would be interested in obtaining. So yeah, really great question. At this time, because we don't, wait, is there any more? Oh, okay, yes, I see someone thanking, of course, Laura. Wanted to thank you all again for taking time out of your late afternoon on a Tuesday to join this training. On this page here, you'll see in the slideshow several of the links that we put in the chat earlier to the Open Records Project, which Ian leads, our Sweet Tea and Transparency Toolkit, which has an explainer not only for Georgia, but for Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Louisiana, to the extent your work or other advocacy or personal interests take you to other states in the South. So please check out those resources, and our contact information is up here. Please stay in touch. We absolutely have had folks after the training reach out to us to ask additional questions related to requests that have already been submitted. So we're here and really grateful for your time and energy and questions. But I think with that, we'll conclude, and Ian,
Yep.
say bye too.
Thanks so much, everyone. Really appreciate it. Please be in touch.